Hey everyone! I'm so excited to announce that Sideshow has unveiled 7 extremely detailed BTS Deluxe statues as a part of a licensed partnership with global superstar group BTS. But before they can hit the stage, these hand-painted, mixed media, scale representations of RM, Jin, SUGA, J-Hope, Jimin, V, and Jungkook have to stop by Sideshow's Cut and Sew room. We're thrilled to give you a behind-the-scenes look at these statues with Sideshow costume fabrication artist, Esther Skandunas. Today, Esther is creating a hanbok robe on a prototype of the J-Hope Deluxe statue. Let's take a look.
As you can see, I've already created a mock-up for the pants, the jacket, and the shirt. And today I will be making the robe. So to start the pattern, I take measurements of the figure, draw down 2.5 inches. It's about 1.5 inches. This curved line here will represent the armhole of the figure. Because of the way this figure is posed, the curve is going to be very large. Now I will do the same steps for the back. Now that I have my front and back pattern, I'm going to place my pattern on the figure. I'm going to remove his arm so that I can see a little better what's happening with my pattern here and see where I need to add or subtract to true up my pattern. And as you can see, one pattern is too long. So that's why I tape my patterns together so that I can place them on the form. The neck needs to come up some. I will make a center back pattern match at the side seam, but it also looks like it's standing up way too tall from the neckline. So I'll just give it a good pinch, just fold it so that I can see how much needs to get taken away from this pattern. Now I'll remove the pattern and make all my changes. Figure. I think that's good. I'm going to add some length. So I'll measure from the neck down to a little bit past the clothing. Just draw a straight line following the center front line. 6 inches is here. I'm going to repeat the process for the center back pattern. Now I will cut this out. The robe, it's not straight up and down. There is some fullness to the bottom of the robe, so I'll do that. I can measure everything and divide it up evenly. I'm going to slash my pattern from the hem up to the top points. I'm not going to cut all the way through. I'm going to leave a little sliver of paper connecting my pieces. This will add fullness not only to the bottom of the robe when I spread things out evenly here, but it'll also add fullness to the body of the robe, which will create some nice wrinkles when it's on the figure. And now I will connect all of these lines at the bottom so I have a good cutting line. I'm going to repeat the process to the back. Now I need to create a sleeve here. I'm going to wrap my tape measure around the arm, about the room that I think it should have. And I pre-measured the arm, and it should be about 4 inches long, the sleeve. The next step will be to create the collar. All I have to do is to draw a straight line from here to here. I'm going to cut this off. Now I am going to create a collar that will start here and end at the center back. And it's going to be fairly straight. So I'm basically just making a large rectangle. I drew a parallel line 3/8 of an inch away from the center front line here. I'll double this amount here. So the left-hand side of the collar is rounded, so I'll just do a little rounding. The collar is actually lined. I'm going to line it with itself. I will duplicate everything that I just did. That way I don't need 2 pattern pieces. And then I'll fold it on that center line. So you see how the shoulder matches up to that notch. On the inside of the robe, you'll see some of the outer fabric. So I have to add some paper here to accommodate for that. So now that we have the pattern created for the robe, I will need to create a lining pattern. I'm going to trace my current pattern. There's going to be a piece of fabric here that will fold around to the back. This has to get cut off, but then I also need to cut off a 1/4 inch on the inside of the pattern as well. So now I'm going to cut out this area here, and that'll be my lining. The last tiny little bit that I need to do are some little ties. I think I need to cut about 3 of these out. So now I've cleaned up my patterns. I put them into Photoshop and just made the lines really nice and clean, and I cut a mock-up out. Now that I have the final pattern here all cut and cleaned up, the graphic arts department here at Sideshow is going to do a custom print job of the material used to replicate the robe that was worn on screen. This is the final fabric. My patterns do not have seam allowance included. I prefer to add that part in as I trace and cut. Now this is only 1/2 of the pattern. So what I'll do now is create a mirror image so I can get a full pattern, and to do that I just flip the pattern piece over. Normally I don't end up creating a mirror image pattern because the pose is very subtle. I find that this pattern actually works as is, and I will add in my seam allowance. I will go ahead and cut this out. So now I need to cut out the lining pattern. It's just a plain black fabric here. I will just repeat the steps that I did for the outer portion of the fabric. All right, have it all traced out, and now it's time to cut. Okay, so now the next step is sewing. The first step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a lighter, and prevent the fraying from happening, I just gently bring the lighter up to the edge of my fabric real quickly too. And I just go along the edge of my fabric, being careful not to catch my fabric on fire. And this helps reduce fraying. The first seam that I'm going to stitch together is the center back seam, which is this line here. The first thing I do is I take my pin and I will match my corners up. So I'm gonna repeat that process all the way down the line here, and then I'll start to sew. When you're sewing such small garments, you really need to slow down. It's very important to be very accurate. Now that I'm done, pull the fabric out and cut my threads. Now that I have my stitch on both sides, I'm going to iron this seam open and flat. I'm going to attach my little cuffs to the ends of the sleeves, just repeating the steps from sewing the center back. I'm now going to bring the front side seam and the back side seam together, and I'm just going to stitch this little area here between where the fabric pokes out a bit and up into that armhole. So now I have the side seams stitched together, the back seams stitched together. It's starting to look like a little robe. My next step will be to stitch the lining together. Next step will be to prepare my little ties. To do that, I'm going to use this glue tape. I'm going to place my glue tape right down the middle here. So now I'll bring all these pieces over to the iron and heat seal that tape. And now I have a sticky side to play with here. I don't need all of the seam allowance after all, so I'll be cutting away right along that tape line. My ties have to have some posability in them, so in order to have posability, I add wire within the inside of my tie. I'm gonna clip it right there, the pencil line, and now I'm going to fold my fabric around the wire. Just by me pressing with my finger, it is creating a nice bond. But now I need to put another piece of tape on here real quick. So I'm going to fold onto that tacky side just one more time, and then I'll press it. So now, as you can see, this little piece of fabric has a lot of posability to it. So I'll go ahead and go to the iron, seal it up, and proceed with the other two. Now that I have my ties ready to go, I do have to add a tie into the side seam here, and I'm stitching over everything, including that wire. The next step is to stitch the lining into the robe. Okay, so I have one front done, and I will repeat the same exact process to the back part of the robe. And I'm just gonna turn it, flip it right side out. The next step is to now iron these two layers. Now you can see the inside of the lining and what I was explaining before, how some of the outer fabric rolls into the inside and it makes a nice finished edge. Now my next step is to attach the lining to the sleeves. The pinking shears will help prevent the fabric from fraying. It cuts these little tiny triangles into the fabric. I'm going to go ahead and iron this open, and I'll insert the doweling rod by using that as if it were like a little ironing board. Now I'm just refolding my cuff on those pressed edges. And now to hold that cuff in place, I'm going to use some more of my fabric glue tape. The next step will be to add the collar on to the robe. I'm now going to add some ties. I'm just going to stitch across my seam line right there. To finish the inside of the collar, I'm just going to use my fabric glue tape. And I'll iron it so that the glue tape will have a nice bond with both sides of the fabric. Okay, now I'm going to go in to make a stitch and create a little pocket for the wire. I will now put my wire into my little tiny pocket that I created down here. And I just have to push it through the pocket. All right, now this robe is complete. It has the wire, everything is posable. So now it'll give the robe some nice life. Now that the robe is finished, it's time to repeat this process for the other members. Here they are, all finished and completed, and I hope you enjoyed the process and you also learned something new.
Thank you all for joining us on this cut and sew process video. We hope you enjoyed your inside look at the BTS Deluxe statues, available now at Sideshow.com.